All right, so is there a connection, and are there connections in general between or among the concepts of genetics, psychology, history, and the concept of evil, right? And so, let me fix the camera a little bit more. But, anyways, where I'm going with this is a review of the book The Lucifer Principle. Here's a cover, right, by Howard Bloom. There we go. Little focus. But, anyways, this was recommended to me by it's been a hot minute since, by Brent Johnson, I'm pretty sure, and he's a financial person that I'm not going to get into for the respect of this video itself. But anyways, the subtitle of this one is A Scientific Expedition into the Forces of History, right? And a major reason why I wanted to read this book was it kind of, from the outset, provides an alternative way of looking at society and how the world works in general, at least from a I'll say mainstream view perspective, right? It's definitely not your typical view on how the world works, right? And if you read the book, it'll be obvious what exactly I mean by that. And I'm not going to say everything, just because I don't like to give the whole thing away. But he gives lots of historical examples, and so like if you like long bibliography, his is, I counted, I think 39 pages. He's got quite a bit of sources in there. But anyways, so who is Howard Bloom? To give a little bit about the author, right? So he was called next in a lineage of seminal thinkers that includes Newton, Darwin, Einstein, Freud, and Buckminster Fuller, right? And he also had a symposium for him by the Secretary of Defense a while ago, right? And so he's a pretty interesting character from what I could tell, and very open-minded, I got from, say, the foreword by one of his colleagues or friends or whatever, right? And so, this American author, born in June of 1943, he was a music publicist in the 70s and 80s and wrote 3 books on human evolution and behavior, right? And I bring this up because he seems to be an interesting character, as I've said, because he's said to have a scientific background. I wasn't able to find exactly what that was. But he also has a website, howardbloom.net, if you want to look more into him and some of his other books. But, right. So, after stating why I wanted to read this book, what is it really about, right? And going more in depth on that. So, not only, and kind of a big argument for him, or a big concept he gives, is not only are individuals organisms, but societies are organisms as well, right? And then and societies themselves must deal with the Darwinian struggle of existence, as he says, themselves, right? And so he really kind of explains conflicts between different societies and so on. And so, to quote from him, it explores the intricate relationships among genetics, human behavior, and culture to put forth the thesis that evil is a byproduct of nature's strategies for creation, and that is woven into our most basic biological fabric, right? And that is taken directly from the back cover, right? Kind of over encompassing the theme of the book itself, right? And he explains this throughout the entire book in multiple different ways. He uses religion, he uses history, a lot of biology, psychology, as stated, genetics, and that sort of thing, to really he gives a lot of scientific experiments that were done, that sort of thing, to really back his argument. And another thing I like about him is he's not very, maybe it's just my personality, but he can be rather vulgar. I don't mean that, it's not like you're gonna see in some like hardcore, how to describe it, I don't know, it's not what you're gonna get with like as in like a vulgar blue collar environment. Is not the degree that I'm talking about, but what you see in a more kind of intellectual book, we'll say. You don't see a lot of curse words, and he has a few in there, if a big thing for you or not, but I tend to enjoy more authors who use that formal language, or aren't afraid to touch, we'll say, touchy topics, right? And who aren't afraid to communicate in a more of an abrasive way, and more of kind of a raw, describe it in more of a raw manner, right? Just to kind of put it that way, because you get what you pay for, right? And there's no kind of beating around the bush, and that's just kind of annoying a lot of the times. But anyways, some of the main ideas that come from this book to give you guys more of an idea of what it's about. So nature can turn very bloody very quickly. He gives lots of examples of that, describes it in different, like, chimp societies. He talks about ants, humans a lot, mice, again, a bunch of different experiments, right? He also talks about humans' need for socialization, basically having a greater society, and calls isolation poison, right? And that's one thing to definitely keep in mind for yourself as well, if you want more of, I guess, self-help type thing. I don't know, not why I read the book, but still thought it was interesting. He also states that there is value in having an enemy, right? And gives examples throughout history to where that was used, right? Especially for control and pleasing one's own human nature, and kind of its portrayal of that through history. And we'll leave it there, right? It talks about ideology and culture and how it can take over everything regardless of the outcome. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be logical or make sense. Again, humans aren't necessarily logical creatures. I think there's a lot of data out there kind of explaining the opposite, that they're very emotional, at least on the core. And he also talks about the expendability of males in society, basically as cannon fodder for war. Obviously not the only thing there. That is just one section of the book itself. Not going to touch too much on the topic in this video. That's not the purpose for that. I've talked a bit more about that in the past, and kind of touches a bit on the more raw nature of his writing that I enjoyed, is the fact that, he does talk about stuff like that. Talks about the importance of the pecking order, and that there will always be hierarchies in nature, no matter how equal or whatever you want to make a society. There will always be hierarchies that crop up in different ways, right? And that doesn't necessarily have to be. It can be hierarchies in certain characteristics of a society, or certain applications of, or I'll say segments of life in general, right? With how I'm trying to say that. People will automatically segregate themselves for certain things based off of competence or whatever the case may be. And he gives more specific examples of that in the book itself, right? And then kind of a final concept I want to put out there that he talks about is prosperity doesn't bring peace, right? It just brings complacency and destruction from, as he says, barbarians. And he gives far dating historical examples for that, and he explains that throughout history, when certain societies became prosperous, they basically just started to get ground down until they eventually no longer exist. And he gives Rome as an example of that. I think ancient Egypt as well, but that'll have to be left to the book itself, right? And so he talks a lot about that sort of thing. A lot about how ideology and psychology plays into human behavior and evolution and that sort of thing. He talks about cultures, on how certain cultures are basically designed to be killers. And he goes more explicit into that in general. And I'll leave that for him to say in his own words. One of those, at least as of right now, anything that I could say about that specifically won't do his argument justice, right? I won't portray it the way he can, as he could probably do it best, which is why I'm going to leave it for him to say. And there's a reason, and I'll leave it here, is there's a reason he calls it the Lucifer Principle. And he talks a lot about that, specifically on why he chose to call it that, right? And we're just going to kind of leave it there. Leave it for you guys to read the book and put your guys' opinion and what you gathered from it in the comments. I thoroughly enjoyed listening to it. It's one of those I will definitely listen to again. So anyways, I'm going to leave this one here. So I hope you guys have a good night, and I will see you on the next one.